Hey there, welcome back to the Greater You. So good to be with you today. Remember that when you jump into our videos, like and subscribe and share our channel. We are working very hard to supply great content to improve the overall well-being of the minds and hearts of all the people across this planet. So please share it. And then, of course, there is that reminder bell you can click on as well that will send you reminders when new videos drop. We tend to do new videos about every 3 to 4 days. There's a video that'll drop. We're into this and we're committed, and there's basically an endless amount of content that's going to come your way. So we have various topics that we're covering. Today, we have an interesting thing to start with. This one hit as I've been analyzing our 7 areas of well-being that we've gone over in several videos and taken various angles on them. Two of them came up, and I want to talk about a connection between two of those areas of well-being. One is that spiritual category, and one is the mind category. So in the minds of people, this is where we really work the scientific method. What we're talking about is two different ways today to discover truth, facts, and, to be able to gather information that we can really assimilate into our lives. And I want to talk about the overlap and the connection between these two, the spiritual process and the scientific method, and how they can actually work hand in hand to help enhance your ability to observe, discern, and assimilate truth and correct ideas. Okay. So here's a cursory research for you to look at. This is just, grabbing some AI to have go out there and find some research. And the question was, what research in psychology has shown about how optimism impacts problem solving in a positive manner? So for the intents and purposes, stay with me on this to show how the spiritual process for discerning, um, truth and the scientific method can actually both lead to the same thing and reinforce each other. We're using the case of optimism as our experimental case. Okay. So our case study is optimism. So if you look at this, the research, this is just pulled right off the web. The research, we got this study by Chiro in 2011 showing that a positive outlook has a positive impact on our ability to problem solve. Go ahead and look through this. We've got some research by Schulman in 2016. Optimistic disposition influences goal setting, motivation, and expectations of success, all of which are critical when solving problems. A study by Carver and Shear on the role of optimism in social psychology suggests that optimists are better at engaging in what is known as adaptive problem solving, which involves not only identifying and implementing solutions to problems, but also adjusting those solutions as needed. In my own studies of, reading so much in the realm of positive psychology, there's gobs of data, lots and lots of data that optimism is a really powerful positive psychology tool, and that it can help with problem solving. Optimists are more open-minded, they're more creative, they can see solutions that a closed-minded pessimist can't see. Okay. So this is just giving you a little cursory look here at that. And now we're going to go here and let me do my next screen share for today. And let's talk about these two methods. And we're going to use optimism as our case study on this. So those research studies that we just looked at, and, we weren't digging into the actual articles, which if you are doing, research and you are digging into articles, you really do need to actually dig into the full article, on PubMed or wherever you can get your articles. Google Scholar sometimes has some you can access. And, if you're really digging into the research on positive psychology, which we use a lot of in our coaching, you need to look at the actual studies, and you need to look at the research methods, and you need to look at the statistical analysis. You need to look at their methodology and all those different things and make sure that the studies are solid, right? So the core of the scientific method for finding truth, we just kind of bumped into some examples of how people have used the scientific method to find out if optimism is helpful in problem solving. So that's just one little snippet there. What did these people do when they did their research? Well, if they're doing sound scientific research, it follows basically these 6 steps that I've pulled together here for you as a person who's done research in the past, in my own career, and in college, and may do research more in the future. I've been mostly a practitioner for the last 20 years, but I've been a consumer of research constantly. Here are the 6 pieces or components of the scientific method. So a person has a question. The question in this instance is optimism helpful for people that are working at problem solving in workplaces, at home, in their lives? So the hypothesis that these people were testing was something around the lines of they hypothesized, they thought that um, optimism would probably have a positive effect or a helpful effect on people's ability to problem solve. So then they conducted various experiments in their research studies where they test that hypothesis. And you want to do this as clean as possible, where you're trying to eliminate, conflicting and confounding variables. You're trying to make it as close to causal as possible, but that's very difficult to do, especially in psychological and social research. So usually you get good correlative data that says, hey, there's a strong correlation there, which means there's a relationship, which isn't always causality and many times is not actually. Shows that things co-occur. But so what they'll do is they'll test their hypothesis and they'll observe and they'll measure, observe, measure, observe, measure. And then when they do this, back when I did my own research studies and when others have done this, then they have to map out their conclusions and their results and do some rigorous statistical analysis on it to see if their hypothesis was proved to be false or correct, right? This is kind of how it goes with all scientific method, right? Whether you're testing what temperature water boils at, or whether or not optimism helps with problem solving. So once you've mapped out your conclusions and results, then it goes through the rigor. If you can get it published in a scholarly journal, then it's going to be peer reviewed by other people in your field that are going to say like, hey, that's a solid study. And then you get published. Yay. And anyone that's in the research world really loves being published, right? I've been mostly in the practitioner side, so I never really worried too much about it. Did some publishing in a couple of magazines and a couple of different articles. There was we worked at it in college to get into some, scholarly publications, but mostly I've been a consumer of research for the last 20, 25 years. But it's the same pattern in all this research, right? And across most fields or all fields of scientific study. Although the modes and the things that they're doing and their questions are different, step 5 is they want to repeat and refine the process. So if you discover that optimism seems to help problem solving, you want to have multiple studies that pile up that show that that happens. And then they want to show a strong correlation that people who have good optimistic attitudes have higher tendencies to do good, solid problem solving in work and at home and in relationships and various venues, right? So then they repeat and refine that process. That's step 5. Multiple studies pointing at the same thing. If the data continues to point at a particular outcome or set of outcomes, and the controls around the research were solid, you may have found a truth or a fact. And generally, if multiple people keep getting the same results over time, then you may have even found yourself a scientific law, right? Which we see things like that. If any of you follow different various sciences, you know what I'm talking about. Scientific laws have been discovered, and things like how gravity works. We don't know what causes gravity, but we do know how it behaves. And so it's a law, right? Gravity has a certain amount of weak force that it exerts on matter, right? So they call it a weak force because there are forces to overcome gravity. And that's a nerd concept for a whole other set of videos, right? Like I said, I'm a science nerd, so I study way too many fields of science. And I actually find that stuff really fascinating. Why? Because the scientific method can lead to discovery of facts and truths and laws and how things work and why they work. Sometimes we can figure out why they work as well through that same rigor. Okay, so let's look at this other one. So in that why we put that in the mind category is that it's a very cognitive process. When you're doing scientific research, there's a lot of problem solving, a lot of thinking. And by the way, the scientific method has suggested that an optimistic attitude, which we teach here at the Greater U, is really good for people who are trying to solve problems, which is basically all of us, right? Most of us spend most of our days solving problems, whether it's how to fix your dishwasher or how to get your next paper in or how to get whatever it is, an A on your next exam, whatever it is. We're always problem solving, right? So, what about this other method? Is there another way that can supplement our scientific method? This is where we at the Greater U absolutely say with a resounding yes to this. It's a different method, though, and it requires being open and different and thinking a little differently. A lot of people try and pit science against spirituality or science against religion. And I think that's a really, hmm, it's not a good thing to do. I don't think that I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? Actually, you know what? It reminds me of a quote. T. Harv Eker, one of my favorite like financial life coach guys out there in the world. He's got a bunch of good books and programs and stuff. I remember I was at a seminar of his many years ago, and he's like, he said, it drives me crazy when people do irrational comparisons. And the example he gave and was really just, it stuck with me. He said, people say money doesn't matter, love matters. Love matters more than money. And he's like, okay, well, why are you comparing two completely different things? Can you go to the bank and deposit a whole bunch of love to pay your bills? So he pointed out the irrationality of the comparison. Those two things really shouldn't even be compared, right? Love is a completely different emotion. It bonds us, hopefully, to other human beings. And yet it can help you be more responsible with your money, or it can help you give your money away to charity, which is a good thing. It can help you be, kind with your money, but it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like love or money. That doesn't make any sense. That's irrational, right? That same logic I would suggest is in the minds of people that are saying that science and religion or science and spirituality, it's one or the other. What about both? And in fact, to quote Harv again, he's like, successful people think both. So what he's saying is, yeah, money is important. In fact, just to finish off the Harv quote, he said, money is extremely important in the sphere that it works, and it's extremely unimportant outside of the sphere that it functions in, like love, right? So yeah, you got to have some money to pay your bills. That's the world that we live in with our token economies, right? Until we come up with something better, it is what it is. So we got to figure it out, which is why financial well-being is one of our categories we talk about. Okay, spiritual method. What is this method of discovering truth and why is this important? Well, it's going to help you with your spiritual well-being and self-development there, which is an important one of the 7 areas. And we put all of those 7 areas as all very important for a human being's well-being. Here are 7 steps to consider. I am not going to pretend to have this all down perfectly because whether it's the scientific method or the spiritual method, I myself am constantly learning, growing, shifting, and changing. And so I give you these 7 steps now, but it might be, something completely different 10 years from now. I doubt it, though. I think we're onto something pretty good here. This is at least a good start on the spiritual method for discerning truth. The first piece here is to be humble and open and able to hear with our hearts and minds. So this is step one. Like, you're not going to receive downloads from, the universe or a higher being or God or whatever it is that you're trying to tap into, or even just truth, if you're just closed minded and closed hearted. So, in order for this method to work, and notice how that's going to help with the scientific method too, right? If you come in with it and you're just like in a grumpy mood, I'm not going to do this research question, and then your science is done before it even starts. So, being humble, open, and willing to hear with our minds and our hearts can really help set the stage for the spiritual method of discerning truth and fact to come into play. The second one is you've got to have desire. You got to want it. A buddy of mine a fellow life coach I learned a ton from. We ran a youth camp once, and he came up with the coolest name on a shirt. He was like, "Hey, we're going to take all these youth and we're working on them developing motivation." So he called it Camp You Gotta Wanna, which was just kind of rolled off the tongue. You gotta wanna, right? You've got to want things. You've got to have the desire in you in order to be able to push any of these methods forward, right? But the spiritual method, specifically, if you don't have a desire to go and find and seek, you will not find because you're not looking, right? Sometimes stuff will hit you over the head in life and be like, yo, you need to pay attention to this. But, it's better to be more open, in my opinion. And it's better to build a desire. Once you have started to build that desire in yourself and open up your mind and heart to start seeking truth of some sort, when you receive a truth, you can receive it through multiple means. Here's just a few: prayer, sure. Meditation, sure. Impressions that come to you, sure. By studying stuff, reading scholarly articles, right? Or reading religious texts, digging into, the Bible or the Quran or, any of these amazing, the Tao Te Ching. There's a ton of really interesting religious books out there, and you can grab onto them, or spiritual books, and there's teachers of spirituality, right? I would say even books like, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer have a vibe around maybe spirituality, although I think it's mostly a cognitive process of letting go that he's working on. But, all these different things through study of different teachings while meditating, while praying, and really trying to seek the truth from the error in it, you can discern and start to receive a truth. So let's take optimism and put it on trial on this method. So if we're trying to figure out if optimism helps us with our own problem solving using the spiritual method, which spiritual can also be emotional too, right? It can have both parts to it. It's because the impressions we get are sometimes thoughts, and they're sometimes feelings, and sometimes both, and hopefully they sync up, right? Okay. So if I'm, like, hey, I'm humble and open to the idea, and I have a desire to find out if optimism is going to help me with my problem solving. So then I go and study it out. Maybe I read some science articles or whatever, or read some cool spiritual stuff on, having a positive attitude or the golden rule, or, doing really kind things and doing things that help boost your mood and make you more optimistic. And you receive this concept that, hey, maybe optimism is going to help me with my attitude and with my problem solving in life, right? So then I conduct, number 4, an experiment on that optimism in this spiritual mode. So I work at it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to consider this idea that optimism helps me with problem solving and that that's a truth. Okay. I'm going to consider this idea. So now I'm going to experiment upon this. I've meditated about it. I've studied it. I've talked to my preacher about it or my pastor about it. And he was like, yeah, be optimistic. Optimism's cool. See if it helps you with your, and you feel good about it. It feels right inside of you, both in your mind and in your heart. You start to experiment upon it by practicing having an optimistic attitude and seeing how it impacts your own life in your own day-to-day problem solving, whether it's finding that lost hammer or that lost screwdriver when you were trying to fix your car or something, or your bike or whatever it is, or the door, right? Doors, sometimes they get loose and you have to retighten the hinges, the screws at least. There's so many things. And so if I can practice the optimistic attitude with my day-to-day stuff, I am doing an experiment of living this and seeing how I feel as I do it. When I feel good about that, like, hey, you know what? My optimism feels good, it boosts my mood, and it definitely is improving my ability to be more open-minded and come up with creative problem solving as I practice this. You then, number 5, have received a witness of that truth through your experimentation and through the feelings you got around it, that it felt right, felt good to be optimistic while working with my problem solving. So you received a witness of that truth. If it's true, it's going to feel right deep within you and yield specific results tied to the truth. In this case, it's, my problem solving is improved while I'm having an optimistic attitude. right? So it proves the Charles Swindoll quote of, he said that life is, and he's a source of spiritual information, right? Because he's kind of like a guy who gives spiritual kind of guru quotes out there. And so the Charles Swindoll quote of life is 90% attitude and 10% what happens to you, right? He's onto something. Maybe his data points aren't perfect with the scientific method, but he's onto something, and we experiment upon that truth that I can have an optimistic attitude and it's going to improve my well-being and improve my problem solving. So you receive a witness that it feels right and it's giving you the results of better problem solving, and you're feeling better when you're doing it. In that instance, step 6 starts to kick in. Your desire to believe has become faith in that truth. And if you now have faith that an optimistic attitude leads to better problem solving. See, it's the same thing. The scientific method and the spiritual method are leading to you discovering truth. These things are not mutually exclusive, and they do support each other. So if you keep working with it and experimenting upon it, then it's going to really settle into you, and you're going to find that optimistic attitude that led to better problem solving among a whole bunch of other positive outcomes. With that repetition and practicing the other steps, that truth that you're pursuing becomes a part of you. And now you have a knowledge deep within you that this is a truth. This is a law, a spiritual law, not just a scientific law now, but a spiritual law that an optimistic attitude leads to better problem solving, which leads to better outcomes in my life. I feel better. My team feels better. We feel better together. And we might sing Kumbaya or whatever, right? And we just feel better. It's like, yeah, let's sing together. Okay. I'm taking it too far, but whatever. You get what I'm saying. So then number 7 is that repetition. Repeat it and practice it and make it a part of you. Notice that both of these methods, the scientific method and the spiritual method, can support each other. And in many instances, using both really helps, right? There are times I remember back when I was doing research in college, there were times where you're just slogging and you needed like some boost of the spirit and attitude and optimism and just to feel good again, because you're just slogging through data and it's just can be so tough, right? Trying to get your data right, sets to like be workable, and making sure you're using the right statistical analysis for the right type of model. It's like there's so much that goes into that. It can be discouraging, and the spiritual method can boost that up. So you can actually use both at the same time, right? So you should write some papers on both of them, people. Try them both out, right? So this was a longer video, but I felt really strongly that this needed to be discussed. We needed to take a look at this idea here that the scientific method and the spiritual method of discerning truth are not mutually exclusive and are certainly not at war with one another. They can be used together hand in hand to help you in your journey of discovering laws, whether they're spiritual laws or scientific laws, of discovering truth, of discovering facts, of discovering what works and what doesn't. Try it out, experiment upon it in both methods, and see what you can come up with. Thank you so much for your time today. And we've got much more deep content to come. It's fun to put these videos together for you. Have a great day.